Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. This is GENIX-JS, a YouTube channel dedicated to teaching you all you need to know to get started with front-end web development. So in this series, we've been discussing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And to wrap up all our knowledge and put it into practice, we've been building this contact form. And currently, we've defined our HTML structure, we've styled up, and we've also defined the basic functionality for validating the inputs of this form. So in this video, we're going to be discussing the following things as we wrap up this series, with analyzing the input states, the validation states to look just like this, and adding some over effects and some CSS states also on the form, just like this. So stay tuned to the end because this video is going to cover a lot. In that video, we define the functionality of the validation of the inputs. So in this video, we're going to continue by actually implementing the success form error states and the success states and the error state of the form, which is going to look exactly like this, right? Which is going to look like this when it is not valid. And we're going to be implementing the event handler, and also we're going to be adding all these special states, how it looks, the over states, the green button, the green the green checkbox, and all those things. So let's continue from where we stopped. So the first thing we're going to be doing actually now is to define another function. And basically what this function is going to do, this function is going to handle our submit. And as it handles our submit, we're going to define another function that displays the error message based on the value that this validates input returns. So just follow me as I do all this. So we're going to define this function under here. So the name of this function is going to be handle form submit const function handle form submit, right? This is the only form that we have here. This is the only form that we have here. So now this handle form submit is a very crucial function, and it should not be used anyhow, and it should also be properly validated because there are few things that it is going to be doing, because most of the things that it is going to do is just run other functions that are doing the most work. So what do I mean? When you click on this submit is running a function that checks all the fields, checks if all the fields are valid, and also it is running a function that checks if each of those fields have contents in them, which is also the same thing as them being valid. So now what do I mean? This handle will also run an event listener, which the button is going to use to call the function. So let's just get started. So let's define what this function will do. So this function handles the form submission. Let's put the contact form submission by running the validate all inputs function and display error or success state function. So this is what it's going to do. So now before we undo, let's define what our button is going to be doing. So the submit button is an input element according to our HTML element here. Please follow me. The submit button, once you click on it, is actually the one that is going to check most of these things. You know, we've been using the console. We actually want to now integrate it into the button. So looking at it, it has an ID of submit button, a type of submit. So basically it is the one submitting this form, right? So the first thing we're going to do now is to define the event listener. So let's say event listener, submit button event listener. So what is an event listener? JavaScript is event driven. Simply saying, JavaScript runs based on events. So since it's an interactive, it has interactivity to a website or a web app. Interactivity has to do with events. A user clicks on this, what happens? A user clicks on this happens. So basically a button handles events. A button is invokes events basically. So when we click on this button, it's invoking an event that checks for this validation of this, and also sends it to the wherever it needs to go to. But we won't be doing that in this video. So to define an event listener, we select our button basically, and our button is submit button, right? So that is the button that will be defining the event listener. So we have, in my JavaScript series, I'll be covering in depth what event listener really is and how it can be used, basically event delegation, event propagation, and all those things. But we're just focusing on basic click event or submit event here. So add event listener. So the event listener is actually a function, and in JavaScript we have what we call callback functions. So in this event listener, it takes in 2 parameters. It can take in more, but there are 2 parameters basically. So we have the submit event basically. Now this submit event is for this button, right? So now the submit event can run a function, but this function is already been defined under here. Let's put this under. I'm sorry this is becoming more complex, but I'll try my best to break it down, especially for those of us who don't really have a grapple of JavaScript. JavaScript is actually easy to understand if you know the basics. So event listeners are functions that are used to attach events to a particular element. So when you click, you scroll, you submit a form, you do those things, so an event runs after. So that's what events, they're like hooks. Basically they hook events to a particular element, and in this case we're hooking the undo form submit event so to this particular button. So you don't need to do this, you don't need to call it, because this event listener is already calling this function under the hood. If you check under the hood, right, the event listener is actually already calling the function, so you don't need all this bulky code here. So the event listener is already checking that particular function, is already running the function, so you don't need to invoke it again, because if you invoke it, then you are running it more than once, and that will give you unexpected behaviors, right? So now that's that about that. So now that's our event listener. So if for us to actually test it, we can use what we call the alert. So we have window.alert. So alert basically pops up an alert box here just to give us a message to notify us that something is happening. So let's say event listener working, event listener working. So this is for our button. If we click on submit, we should receive event listener. Okay, it didn't work. Oh, okay, this is meant to be a click event, not a submit event, because buttons don't have submit events on them. It is forms that have submit events on them. So now that's about that. So now we have event listener submit. If we click on this, it gives us event listener working, right? But then we're not going to be using this button because it is a form we want to submit. We only use event listeners, click event listeners for buttons when we are dealing with another type of button like a dialog, a modal, a navigation. When you are dealing with forms, you use the form directly. So we're not cancelling the button, we're leaving the button there, but then we're just going to define the form, submit form, because this is what will actually give us some special properties that we need. Special properties such as prevent defaults, so to prevent it from submitting like this, to prevent it from rolling and loading like this. So for us to do that, we say documents dot, we're getting the elements by the ID, and then if we go to our HTML, so now in the form we have contact form as the ID, right? So that's going to be the name of our ID, contact form, right? So just for us to test, let's just comment this out, because we're not using the button event listener anymore. It is now the form that we are using as the event listener, right? I hope you get this. So now in order for us to test, let's console.log the form. So it should print in our console the submit form. Let's go to our console. Alright, so this is our form. It has selected it for us. So once we submit this form, we're adding an event listener to actually check for all this. Once we submit this form, it handles all those things that we said the button would handle earlier. So we're going to comment this out and put this down here. So now we can cancel this, right? So now let's now define the event listener for the form. So we'll say submit form event listener, right? So now we can say submit form the same way we defined for the button, only that this one is going to be type of submit. Since it's a form, you don't submit a button, you submit a form. That's the event. So now there's something we call callback function. A callback function is a function that is executed after a particular action has been performed. What do I mean? So now, for example, you have something like this. This is a function, and then this function runs another function. So basically, this is what a callback function is. So let's just put it here. Callback functions define or are functions that are executed after a specific action has been performed. So what action are we performed here? The action we performed here is a click event. Once we run this click event, this function calls this function. So it is calling this function. The function has been defined, but we are not executing it. We're only executing it after an event has occurred. So callback function, they are mostly used in asynchronous. Actions, such as sending data to a server, querying a database, etc. Right? So that's what callback functions are used for. So basically, let's go on. We're going to be implementing our success and error states soon. So now that we defined our callback function, let's test it now. Let's do window.alert callback function called. So when we click on the submit button, which submits the form, since it's a submit, it is going to print our callback function and it's going to alert us with this particular windows of alert. So we have callback function called, and then if we save this and we click on submit, you see it's working. Callback function called. So now we can actually start to call the functions that will handle all the checking of the inputs, validation, states, and all of those things. So now the first thing we need to do is to define a function that will print out our error and success states, right? So now I want you to pay attention here because it's becoming a little complex now, because we're now going to be using different functions inside another function to be called by a particular function when an event occurs. I know that sounds long, but that's basically what we're going to be doing here. So not to complicate things, let's just create a function that will handle and display all our success states. So synchronously, we're first validating all inputs, then we are displaying. Let's create another function for display error or success states. So that's what this function does. So now, before we write any line of code, let's understand what we are doing. If you look at this particular form, we first validated all the inputs, right? Now we want to perform an action, and this action is based on this final state here that we have defined here. We want to perform an action, right? We want to perform this action. If the user does not enter anything, this is what we want to put down. This is what we want to put down as the error state. So now this will make us to modify our HTML, but let's start with our JavaScript first. So now we're going to be adding each of these error states into different variables, right? So let's do that now. So now the first thing we're going to be doing, we're going to be putting it here. This function, always define what your function does, gives you a clear head start so that you won't get confused, and then model up your functions together. This is good practice. And let your function always solve, let the name of your function solve exactly what you are doing with it. Don't define a function that displays error and is displaying something else. That's confusion basically. This function displays the error or success states of the inputs after the button has been after the button is clicked based on the validation states. So basically the validation states is this states here. So this function is going to be making use of this function, right? It's going to be making use of this particular function, and as it's making use of this particular function, it's now going to display error or success states based on whatever values are gotten from here, right? So this function displays the error message or success states of the inputs after the button has been clicked based on their validation states, right? So that's just a simple explanation for what this function is going to do. It's doing two things. It's running this function, extracting the values, and displaying success or error based on the validation states. If it's error or success, it displays it to the form input. It extracts the values from the validate all inputs. It displays success or error based on the success or error based on the validation states of the inputs, right? So that's what the function does. So just a simple thing that the function does. So the first thing we're going to do now is we're going to first define all the success and the error states. So let's say const, since it's going to be a constant, it is not going to change at all. It is just going to be viewed and removed. So const first name error message. So const first name error message is going to be equal to, or instead of saying const first name error message, we have these two to be the same. So I'm just going to say name error message because they are both for the name. This field is required. Okay, and then we have this. You know what we're just going to do? Let's create it separately to avoid any confusions. So first name error message. So it's going to be a string. And we're going to type this field is required. Right? This field is required. And then you can say const last name error message. We're also going to say this field is required. This field. So we're just following everything that we have here so that we can display it based on whatever values are given to us here, based on what the user enters, if it is valid or not. So we're also going to be doing more complex validations, but that will be later on in this video. So this field is required, right? So now that's for the first name and the last name. So let's create the remaining. Const email address error message. So instead of success state, we say error message or success states. Error message or success error. Okay, let's just put error or success state. Let's not complicate it. Also, keep your code simple as possible. And I believe that this code is actually as simple as possible. Although there are better ways to write more efficient code, but for beginners, our advice you start with this. It makes you understand all the background of how you can put things together in JavaScript. So let's just go on. So now, please enter a valid email address. So that's what this one is saying. So the query, okay, let's just put them together instead of spacing it too much. So query type error message. So I'm just typing what I have there in picture. So we have please select a query type, right? Please select a query type. Please select a query type, and then the message can say const message error message. Oh, that's redundant. Error message. Okay, let's put it as message message text area, right? That's better. Error message, this field is required. So let's go and change the name. Message text area is message text area. So your code must be consistent every single place, because as it grows, especially for large software, but this is small work, the more you apply these principles early, the more you get used to them, and the harder it is for you to even avoid them. Text area, message text area, and then we can now change it here, message text. Alright, that's fine. Message text area, message text area. Then we have it here also, message text area. Yeah, that's all. So everything is consistent. And the last thing is the consent form. So we have const consents checkbox error message. So we have to submit this form, please consent to submit this form, please consent to being contacted. So basically you see that this is a very simple way to write JavaScript, even if it's kind of long. I mean, we're dealing with the basics here, but this is a very simple way to write JavaScript, making use of functions and variables and even conditions too. So it just gives you a whole overview of how JavaScript works and how you can use it, understanding how to program and script your website. So now we've defined all the error messages for the state. So now the next thing to do is we're going to be applying CSS, and the reason why we're applying CSS is so we can apply this outline state to our input and also apply this color red. So in order for us to do this, we actually have to test it first to see that it is actually working. So now that we've defined our let's put it here, define input error messages, right? So now we're going to call this function validate this. So basically we're getting our, so let's say store validation state values. So now storing the validation state values, okay, that's recommended by AI. So the validation state is going to be in arrays. So we're storing the validation input values, right? So that is what we're doing here. We're storing the validation input values, but we have to impute the parameters, each of those parameters, and those parameters, remember, we pass them in as arguments from here: first name, last name, email, query types, message text, the consent checkbox. So now let me explain what we're doing here. We defined the input error messages that will be shown if any of this is false, right? So we're going to be applying array methods here too. So let's just continue. So the first parameter or the first argument is the first name, which we've defined already. The second one is the last name. The third one is the email address. The fourth one is the query type. The fifth one is the message text area. The sixth one is the consent checkbox. So that's all. So this is going to give us an array of boolean values. So now what do we do with this array? We can loop through it. We can loop through this array and actually put in respective elements, respective error messages that matches respective error messages that matches the validation states. Now let's read what our function is doing. This function displays the error or success states of the input after the button is clicked. Based on the validation states, it extracts the values from the, so that's what we've done. So we can say extract validation state values, right? And it displays success based on the validation. So now the next thing we want to do now is display success. So let's try that. Display success or error based on the validation state of the inputs. So that's what we're doing next. So now, in order for us to do this, we're going to say if, so the first thing is if the validation state, that's the first one is first name, right? If it's equal to false, so you can see now that's the same thing, but we're not going to be doing is if it's equal to false. We're just going to do a not, we're going to use a not operator. So if this is equal to false, right? So if the validation state, the first one, if it's equal to false, now this is where we come to CSS. Now let me put this on full screen and let me split this. So now that we splitted this, we can put our CSS to the left side here. So now that we put our CSS to the left side here, if you look at our design very well, we have an error message appearing under each of these particular elements. So that means we need to define error message placeholders under each of the elements. So let's put this to the left again, right? So now let's open our HTML first, rather. So to define an error message under our first name, it is going to be directly under this place. It's going to be under the input. So just a simple span will do the trick, and then this simple span we can give it a class of error message for general styling, or input error message, right? Input error message for general styling, so it's not going to contain anything at all. Input error message. So we can give it the same here to this first name. Let's say span class of inputs error message. So we're already defining each of these error messages here. Input error message. So now the email also has the same. So span of class input error message. So that's the same thing also for the query types. For the query types, everything is under the radio buttons. So everything is under this div, the query group. So we have it here, span. So this one is not input error message, but radio button or radio group error message, right? Even if it's an input, let's stipulate the radio group error message. I'll tell you why. So now under this one we can put text area error message, right? So class text area error message. Okay, let's just make it error message everything generally. Sorry about the redundancy. So let's just make it error message generally. If we need to put the inputs error message or specify them separately, we will do that with IDs. So now that's that about that. So we created the HTML elements for the placeholders for those error messages, and same here applies to this, adding a span, which is an inline element. So we have error message. So now the next thing is our CSS. So our CSS now, since it's related to the input, we can create it here, and then we can just put input error message styles, input error. So how do I create that? Control and / input error message styles, right? So now inside this input error message styles, we have error state. So now error states, now look at this. For us to actually implement error state, you can see that for us to actually implement error state, you can see that on error it is red, while on success it is green, right? So that's what it's giving us. So on error it is red, so we're going to do error state. So that's border 1 pixel solid red according to how it looks here, and the color also, right? So that's the error state. So the error state is going to be given to the input itself. while the error message text or error message, so the error message class is going to be given to the span. It's going to be given to the span, and everything will be done using JavaScript. So that's the same thing now we're going to do for the success too. Success message, input success styles. So the styles input success does not have a message, it only has a state, and the state is just this, right? So we're going to create just success state and make it green. Success state. So just give it a border of 1 pixel solid green. So that's all. So we don't need the error message, we don't need success message since there's no success message here according to the design. We only need error message. So we've created the CSS for that, so we can now directly undo it inside here. So the first thing we need to do is to select all the error messages, right? We have to select all the error messages. So now for us to select all the error messages, we can put it here and say const error messages, or we can put all error messages, and we say document dot, remember now we have documents dot elements by get element by class. We also have a special one that we can use to select elements, and this one can be used for either class IDs, elements, or even data attributes, which we'll be discussing in our next video. So basically this is called query selector, and query selector basically selects an element based on the type of selector. So now what type of selector are we going to be using? We're selecting different elements. So query selector all is going to select all elements with the class of, so this one allows us to use this notation or ID, anyone, all elements with the class of error message. So just for us to test this that is working, we're going to console.log error messages, and we should see all our spans. Error messages, right? And we should see all our spans show up for us. Alright, so you can see we have 6 spans. We have the one for the first name, let me zoom out, the first name, we have the one for the last name, the one for the email, the one for the query type, the one for the message, and the one for the consent checkbox. So we have everything we need already. So the next thing we need to do is to start to display them in proper order, right? So let's go down to our function. Let's go down to our function. So now we're going to say if the first validation state, which is first name error message, if the first validation state, remember this not symbol that we defined here, this not symbol, right? So if the first validation state is false, that means if there's an error, it is not valid. What should we do? So if it is not valid, then let's put a function. We're going to display error message and error state on the inputs. So error message under the inputs, error states around the inputs as a border, right? So now in order for us to cover this, we can now define the error state. So we can say error message, all error messages, the first one, which is the first error message, is what we are going to be adding a class to. So now look at, understand this, let me put this on full screen. Understand this, right? So now this HTML element as this first one, if there's an error, this error message would have the value, right? We're going to give it a value. So we're going to say the text contents, right? There's a property named text contents, and the text contents will basically be this. You know, it's empty now, there's nothing inside, but when there's an error on the first input, basically add the error message content for that first input. So we say text content is equal to first name error message. So that's all. So let's test it out. We should see something load for us. Let's test it out. Let's just put this to the left, and then let's go and select our So we're testing it out to see if it works. So since this is what we're calling validate all inputs, so we've not called it in here yet. But let's just okay, we can use it on our console. Since we've not yet called the selector and the function, the button. So we can just say display success or error state. Now you can see that it gives us this field is required because we've not entered anything, and we've not we've not added an else block to undo this particular one, so it is not going to disappear even if we type in something. What do I mean? An else block that says if it has not been implemented, if it is not empty, that we should remove this. We've not implemented that, so it is still going to remain there. So when we do this, we've added the error message, right? So else, that means if it is true, let the error message, the text content, be equal to nothing. As for the first one, let it be equal to nothing. And now let's add the input state, right? Let's add the input state. So adding the input state will make us to select our input, which is the first name, and then add a class of error states on it. So what do I mean? Look at this. Look at our CSS. Defined error states, border 1 pixel solid black. That is what we're going to put in around the input, and the input here is the first name, which is what we're validating, basically. So if we were to add that, we're going to say first name dot class list dot. So we're going to be adding a class. So this allows us to add different classes. As you can see, adds all arguments passed except those already present. So basically this is a property in JavaScript of an HTML element that allows us to add different class names to a particular element. So as I said, you can add multiple classes in an element as possible. So we're going to put error state. So let's test it again to see if it gives us that border around it. So we're going to be running our display error message, and you see it has given us what we need. So all we just have to do is populate everything. So let's say that we now type something inside here and we run it again. So now we remove this class that we have around here also. So what are we going to do? We're going to remove it here. So we're just going to say first name, easy peasy. We just say first name class list dot remove. So we'll just remove that particular class name that we added to it, error state, and that's just it. That's what we'll just do for the rest. So everything is going to happen when we submit our form. So we've added it. So that's what we're doing now. So let's run it one more time and see if it removes it. So we're not putting anything. Let's run display error or success states and see that it gives us this. So let's type a name, Timmy, and then let's run it. So now it has removed it, but then as it removes it, we actually want to make it green to show that it's actually success. So everything that I'm doing here, that I'm testing here, is actually when we click on this button, not by typing it in the console here, which is going to be our final action for this particular video for the JavaScript aspect. So now as we are displaying the error message, right here, we want to remove the error message and add the success state. So remove the error message and the error state and add the success state. So adding the success state, you can say okay, first name dot class list dot add. So now to add the success state, we can let's check our styles to see what we named it. Success state, right? Success state. So now let's test to see. So once we get for the first input, the rest of the inputs are actually not stressful. as we can just easily just copy and paste everything and just edit it for the respective inputs. So now let's check. So now I have not typed anything in. Let's run the function. I type something in. Let's run the function. So it gives us that particular success state, right? So that's what it is giving us, and everything happens only when we submit. So by default it is normal. So if I refresh this page, it returns back to normal. But if I type something inside and I click on submit, it gives me this success state. If I type if I don't type anything inside and I click on submit, if I don't type anything inside and I click on submit, it gives me this field is required, right? So let's just populate everything for each of our elements now, right? So we've already defined the HTML and CSS. Let's just populate everything. So we say if the validation states, if the second one, which is the last name, if it is false, then we're just going to autocomplete it. Sorry, the second one, and then we're going to say last name dot class list dot add error state, right? Error state, and then we're going to say else. So I'm just going to speed up this whole process. So now that we have implemented every single error state and success state and the removal of each based on this function that is displaying the error and success state on each of the inputs, the next thing to do now is to implement our event handler function, which we then call this function. Now let's now test this function to see if the error states are shown appropriately. So now I'm just going to go to my this and then open up the console. Okay, so I've not typed anything yet. It should show me error states for every single one. So as you can see, it's showing me the error states for every single one, but there's an error in this two. It's not showing me for this. Okay, cannot read properties of undefined, reading add at display error. So basically that's what the console is used for. The console serves as your compiler for your JavaScript code. It compiles everything and then shows you, or interpreter, anyone, it shows you exactly what's wrong at line 215. Wow. Okay, query type error message. Oh, okay, so it's basically the query type error message we're adding it to. It's meant to be the query type, the query types, right? It's meant to be the query types. We're adding error message. So now look at it very well. Remember what I said about the query types. So for this query type, we're selecting the first one and then we're adding the error message to it, and then we're also selecting the second one and then we're adding the error state to it, right? So now we're doing the same for this. The first one, we're removing the state from it. Query types, not type. Same thing as the second one. We're removing the state from it, right? So now we're also going to remove from the query types error once it's successful. So we have 0, and then we have query types class list. Alright, so that's about that. So that wraps. Okay, for the first one, rather, that's not all. Alright, so that's it. So let's look at this one also. Concept checkbox, all error message, the fifth one. Alright, so let's see if it gives us the expected outcome. All right, so basically everything has been printed out, but it's not looking the standard way as we defined our form. It's not looking the standard way, so we're going to use CSS to correct everything. But let's just compare it to the design, right? Alright, you can see the field is required, this. Select the query type and then the message. So basically that's how everything is. So the next thing that we're going to do now is to add the event listener, the button, right? So for us to do this, we're going to focus on this handle form button. So this handle form button is basically what is going to call the display error message function. So instead of saying by running the, so it is running the disk in the display error message function. So this function takes care of everything. And then we can just cancel this. So before we click on submit, there's what we call prevent default. So I want you to pay attention to what happens after I click on submit. Even as I have errors, just look at what happens. So now I click on submit. That's a very, very weird attitude. Very, very weird behavior. It's not meant to just load, it's meant to load and stay. So we want to prevent this default loading, the way it's loading. So we have what we call the event object. And the event object is basically an object that is tracked by JavaScript when we add event listeners to buttons or elements. So you can define it as event. So this event is a parameter that goes into the listener, because it goes into the listener function, and then after going to the listener function, we can then access it to tackle that particular event. So the event can be used to either prevent the default of the particular element or even access the particular element that we clicked on, right? So we can click on event.target. Let's console.log event.target and also prevent the default. So to see the actual element that we're dealing with. So these two lines here, I can put a comment here, prevent the default form submission behavior. And then this log the target, the event target to the console. Right, so now let's go and check. So let's open our console on the other side. So this should work. So now it has prevented the default and it has console.log our target, which is the form. So basically this is what is the event, this is where the event is attached to. If it was the button, it would be this button that it will print out for us. So basically now I want to format the way this looks, want to add some beautiful styles to it just to make it look proper, and also now implement responsive CSS. So how about what if we type this, and we type this and we put in a valid email, and we select one and we type something here, and we type this and we submit. You see that it is giving us the success state, but then with the way it looks in the design, this is not how it actually looks. We have something like this green, this one with the background selected like this. So basically if we want to implement this, everything is all CSS, right? But you can see that it is actually working. If I click on submit, you see that it gives us the field is required. So let's start to style this error message and how they look. So I'm going to put this to the left, right? And then let's cancel everything. So this was typically done with the JavaScript. We're just left with responsive CSS. So sorry for the length of this video. It's just you needed to understand some concepts before we could start. So now what we're going to do now is we're going to go into where the error message is, looking at our HTML file. and then let's click on submit again. Uncheck this. Alright, so now with the way it looks in the design, this is meant to be under here, and this also is meant to be under here. Alright, so let's do that. So checking the HTML. So the error message basically is directly under the radio group, right? It's directly under the radio group. So instead of making it a span, let's just make it a paragraph. So the reason why I'm saying let's make it a paragraph, we don't need to do CSS to add any special styling. We're making it a paragraph because a paragraph is a block level element, so it takes up zone space. It's not a span that So if I do that and I click on this, it should take up, you see, it has already come under here, but it is still staying here. Okay, because the field is not properly structured. So how about we put the error message of, okay, no, not this, let's see this. So let's make this a paragraph and see what it gives us. Okay, so that has given us what we needed, same as this. I will be reducing the font size of each of these error messages. So let's make this a paragraph as well. Okay, alright, that's fine. So the next thing that we need to do now is to reduce the font size of the error messages. So you can say font size, let's give it the same font size as the input. So the input has a font size, let's give it 12 pixels. So yeah, that's fine, it's reduced drastically. And now we're going to be selecting the one for the checkbox. We want to reduce the margin of between these two. So the next thing now is responsive CSS. So now for us to actually do responsive CSS, there's what we call media query. So media query is, okay, there are still extra states such as this background. So let's just add this extra states. Let's add it. You can say radio button success style. So you can say radio success state. Right, radio success state. So now the radio success state, we're going to give it a background color of light green, because according to how it looks in the design here, it's light green, right? Light green, light green. So we're going to give it background of light green, and then after giving it background color of light green, okay, that's basically, and then border, yeah, border of 1 pixel solid green. So that's when it's selected. Let's look at the error state of it as well. Okay, so that's all. So we're going to be adding to our JavaScript as well. So when it is successful, so for the one that is selected, now this is what we're now going to. So display error state. I want you to look at this very well. Right, this code is bulky, but I mean, it gives you a foundation of JavaScript. So now this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So any one of them that is selected, apply it to it. So we're going to be using array methods now. So in order for us to use array methods, we're looking at the fourth one, this query, yeah, query types. So using array methods, so that's what is happening inside our, or rather, let's just create a new function, display function display radio success state, right? Display radio success state. So basically what this is going to do is this takes in the radio state. So we have radio button 1, or let's just put query types basically. And then this query types, we're going to say query types, so we're going to give it array dots from query type. So now remember, in an array you can't select an HTML element as an array, or let's use this array constructor. So an array constructor is basically a function that constructs or that creates an array from a list of elements, a list of items, such as this HTML collection element. Such as the, you click on query types, you see, if we say array from query types, so it gives us this array, right? And then from here we can now start to manipulate. You can say dot map okay, let's put in a variable array. So you can say dot map, you can say dot for each. So now that's that. So we're going to store this in a variable. We're going to say, or const query type array. So the reason we're creating this variable is so we can display the selected one. I know this is kind of becoming complex, but you can either use CSS or JavaScript. So let's just use JavaScript to do this. So this video is mostly about JavaScript. So query type array, right? And then we want to look for the one that was selected and apply the style to it. So I'm going to say query type array. We're going to filter. So this method filters the one. So you can say each query type, or we'll just say query type, right? So basically, if the query type is checked, then basically we want to apply the style to it, right? If the query type is checked, we want to apply the style to it. So that's basically what this function is doing for us. If any of these query types are checked, we want to apply the style to it, and everything happens when we submit the form. Basically, it happens when we submit the form. So let's just go on. Let's see. Yeah, everything happens when we submit the form. Okay, let's continue. So it is when we click here and we submit it. So now we want to select that query type, and then let's class list. So we're going to add the class list of this radio success state to it. Radio success state. Alright, so that's it. Let's now check. We have to run the function. So let's just put what the function is doing. So say this function checks for the selected query type, radio button, and applies the success state to it. Right, so we're going to also undo when it is not checked, right? So if it is not checked, okay, let's check if it's checked first. So what do we do now? We run it inside this function. So after you've applied it here, it's supposed to be somewhere here, yeah, before here. So instead of applying success state on this place, we're not applying any of this, right? We're not applying any of that. Instead, we're applying this. We're going to run the function display radio state, and then we can pass in the query types. So that's just that about that. That handles everything. So now if we submit our form, see that it has given us the success state, because if we zoom in, so it has given us the success state. Okay, so basically it didn't work because we're adding it to the input. You don't add styles to radio inputs, you add styles to the parent. So in order for us to do this, we're going to check the element here, the element that has the parent. So the radio input here is this. So the radio group is actually what we want to select. So I'm just going to say radio group, that's what we want to select. So radio group dot the parent element, right? So in JavaScript we have what we call parent element. So the query type dot parent, so the parent element of the query type is this. So I know this is overwhelming, you really don't have to do most of this. It's just so we can achieve functional design, functional form. So I hope I've been able to carry you guys along so far. So basically, query type dot parent element dot class list dot add, and then it's radio success state. So that's what we added here just now. And we save it and we click on it. So basically, it has given us that success state, right? We click on this. So now I want to remove it, right? When we click on submit, we want to remove it also. So by default, let us remove it. So normally we can just say so normally you can just say query type checked, query type of the parent elements by class list, and then we can remove the radio success state. So basically it is still showing there, but then it is actually what we want, even if it doesn't look like what we want, but it's what we want. So there's what we call unchanged handlers, but we're not going to be doing that in this video. So I think this is enough. Basically this is enough. At least we have been able to understand how we can add these functionalities using JavaScript, right? So let's finish up the responsive CSS, which is the last part of this video. So let's refresh this page, put this on full screen, zoom in a little, and then let's fill up this form. First name, let's put GENIX, let's put tech, genixtech.com.ng, genixtech@.com.ng. Support request, this is a wrap. and then once we click on submit, it shows us, okay, it's just showing us the success state of this actually, and you can see that it's highlighting every single green. They're highlighting every single one of them green, right? But what if we remove the email and we remove the message? You see, it's showing us that the field is required, but it should also remove the success state from that. So that is what is left. So you should actually remove this success state. So by default, we're going to add success state. So we're going to say first name. So we're going to say first name the class list. So by default, you should actually remove the success state. So without wasting that much of our time, I'm going to copy this and just edit it. Put it in here, paste it, Ctrl V, change this to last name. So without wasting any much of our time, just add in the success, remove the success state from each. Alright, this one is already being handled. The success state is already been removed here. It's already been removed here, so I'm just going to leave that there. So I said that because we already have this function that is handling it, right? So we can change the function display and remove radio success state. Remember, your function name must be specific, and remove radio success state. So here we're going to put it message so it's meant to be consent text box, actually consent checkbox dot class list dot remove and consent checkbox the class list dot add. Alright, so that's fine. That's about that. So we can finish up with this styling, the final styling. So to create media queries, so we can just put it here and say responsive CSS media queries, right? So what are media queries? Let me give you an example. So let's visit a website. So now if you visit something like Wikipedia, right, wikipedia.com. Now this is wikipedia.com, a very large website basically that contains a lot of information. Now you can see how it's responded based on the screen. If I do this, you can see this. As I'm doing like this, it's shrinking, right? And you can see some elements appearing, some elements disappearing. So basically that's what responsive CSS is. This now is probably for a phone screen size. And if you want to know more about this, you can just inspect your page. You can just inspect your page and you'll be able to view it like this. Just inspect your page and be able to view it like this. You can select, after you inspect your page, you can select phone, you can select laptop. Just based on your screen size, you can select laptop, as many as you want, tablets, laptop, you know. So basically that's how it looks. So let's look at the design, how our responsive CSS is going to look like. So we finished the error state, we've actually completed it, but remain over state as well. So let's just finish with this particular one, right? So we're going to be putting this to the left, and then we're going to be putting this to the right. Okay, so now to create media queries, the first thing you have to do is understand the width of your screen. So we have different width in media queries. We have 768 pixels, which is for tablets. Actually, everything, you can get everything here, right? You can get everything in here. If you inspect this, you can get everything here. So you can see the width screen of phone 375. You put it on full screen, you can see how it looks. The width screen on laptop also same thing. So basically, so you can just say 365 pixels phone, 1004 24 pixels laptop. So that's basically it. So now, how do we make use of this to create a media query? So we have what we call maximum width and minimum width. So in CSS, we also have the property called maximum width and minimum width. So maximum width is basically the maximum amount of width any element can be, and minimum is the least amount of width an element can be. So we want it such a way that the least, when an element is this small, the least amount of width, when the element, the minimum width starting from here should have this kind of layout. So what do I mean? Before I write any code, I'll just do this. Now if you look at our structure here, let's remove this responsive. So let's remove this responsive basically. So now if I do this, you can see that it's not really responsive like that. This is how it is fully. So in order for it to shrink up to this extent, we need to apply what we call display flex and maximum width and minimum width. So to do that, define our media screen, and then max width. So the max width should be equals to 375 pixels, which is for phone, 375 pixels, right? So max width should be equal to 375 pixels. So when it's 375 pixels, what are the elements that we're going to be selecting? So if you look at it very well, looking at our design, we have this first three, 1, 2, 3. We have them changing, alright, to become like this. So how do we handle this? If we look at our HTML, we can see that name input group is where this is happening. And name input group has a flex property of row. So we're not going to give it a flex property of colon, right? So we're going to select this, and then we're going to copy it, and then we'll go down, and then we'll paste it here. The only thing we have to change is the flex direction. So we'll give it a flex direction of column, right? So now let's see how it looks on the browser. So if we inspect this again, so put it to responsive 100. Alright, so this is how it looks. Put it to this small one. It really shrinks down. It's not really giving us what we want. I think we should find out why. So now looking at this design, it's supposed to be shrinking, but it's reducing in size. It's not supposed to be like this. What we are doing wrong. So this will be quick, it won't take time. So now we defined our min width to be this, which is pretty much all that we need. So the next thing that we need to do is also define for the query radio group also. So define for the query radio group also. So this is for small screen. So now let's also define a media query for the tablets. So the media query for tablet is going to be max width. Or basically, let's just say you can combine media queries together, right? I know that you might not really understand media queries here now, but I'm going to have a comprehensive CSS tutorial on media queries. So that's about 4 tutorials now plus the JavaScript series, keeping a count. So, and you can say max width. So if the max width is equal to 768 pixels, basically it should give us this styling. All right. So that wraps up this video. It now, you can see that it is already responsive. Another increase. Okay, max width. See, it's becoming responsive. As I close it down, you can see. So let's just adjust the max width a little. Let's adjust it to 600. Since the tablet is going to actually display it fully, right? So we can just do this. Now you can see that it's responsive as soon as it hits 600 breakpoint. That breaking point is what makes it to be like this, right? And we can just add a little bit of margin around it, margin to space the way from the page. So you can just say wrapper, or no, not wrapper, you can say main, and then this main will have margin of 10 pixels all around. All right, margin of 10 pixels all around, or let's say 30 pixels. All right, so it's not really showing, but then at least we got the colon. Not at least, but then we got the colon styles. Alright, so that wraps up this video. Thank you for staying till the end of this video. Thank you for staying till the end of this series. So we have our design, and we have our solution. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and for those of us who are interested in learning CSS, please stay tuned on my channel. Who are interested in learning HTML, stay tuned on my channel. Who are interested in diving into web development, stay tuned on my channel. Support this channel, because this is actually what will make me continue making videos. And also, I just realized that many people want to know how to code. They actually want to learn it, but they don't just know how to start because of how saturated text space can be, although it's not. But then this is an opportunity for you to dive in through my tutorials. And please leave a remark to what you want to see improved in coming videos. Thank you very much. I remain GENIX Tech, your YouTuber. Thank you for watching till the end. Leave a like and subscribe. See you in the next one.